Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. We do have a rockstar panel here today, and the topic is, what do strategics want? And I think that's a question that a lot of people are very interested here in the audience, hearing more from this esteemed panel of rabble-rousers. So let's see, you want to introduce yourselves? And
Sure, so I'll start. So I'm Noam Krantz. I do venture investing for Johnson & Johnson, medtech specific. Prior to that, ran business development for Ethicon, part of J&J for about 10 years, and led the transaction committee for deal approvals and all that for the medtech sector for about the same amount of time. So great to meet y'all.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Cleary. I run corporate development for Medtronic.
I'm Finn Haley. I lead corporate development for Edwards Lifesciences. I've been there for a couple of years. Prior to that, I was at 3M Healthcare for quite a while in corporate development roles, strategy, business development roles. Then prior to that, I had the honor of working for a while with this man next to me at Piper Jaffray. So
a lot of us go back.
Yeah.
Great to meet everybody. Erich Wolff. I head up strategy and corporate development for Becton Dickinson. I've been in that role now for about 8 or 9 months. Prior to that, I spent between 11 and 12 years at Medtronic in the corporate development team, working for that guy over there.
You left?
Well, I called you, I emailed you, I texted you. You never got back to me. It's been 9 months, Chris, and you didn't show up for the panel prep.
All your stuff's in your office.
You got to check your email. So yeah, he and I have worked together for many years. I ran strategy, business development for various segments within Medtronic, and kind of hopped back and forth into the corporate development team as well. And then, as Finn mentioned, started my career at Piper Jaffray.
great. As you can see, I told you I had a group of rabble-rousers up here, so buckle up, everybody. So you want to start talking about the industry trends? Do you want to look into your crystal ball, take a look at MA activity, the first half this year, the second half? What do you think?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I think it continues on, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's been a big kind of last 5 to 10 years of, an amazing amount of activity. There's still a ton of probably divestiture activity that's going to happen. I think there's a ton of availability of capital as all these companies have come together and consolidated. So everybody's got the ability to write large checks, and as we go into what seems to be not a downturn, but a little bit of a bear market in ways, I think all of the companies that are on this panel, are ready to move, and so I'd be surprised if you didn't see maybe even a little bit of an increase in activity.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, we're seeing some softness, I think, coming out of a very active 2021 in this first half, but we are anticipating it picking up here in the back half. And so, like Noam said, I think it's a good point. I mean, we're ready to go. We're just looking for the right assets and more, realistic valuation expectations.
The realistic valuation
That's the gap. That is the gap. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that one takes a little bit of time to adjust, doesn't it? I mean, it's the reality of it. We've been very busy looking at a lot of things. I'd still say we're pretty busy. One point I've just noticed as I've been looking around the market is negotiating time is stretched out a little bit, and some of it, I don't know if you've seen the same kind of thing, but some of that is valuation, some of that is just everyone kind of taking a pause and seeing where the market's going. But we also expect it to be a busy year in general.
Yeah, look, I think when COVID hit, right, the market dipped and stayed down for about 15 heartbeats, and then it rose up to record highs through the decline in procedural volume through COVID. Valuations are down now because of inflation, which investors view as a much bigger headwind than COVID. So I do think that there's a lot of companies that are out there that have a 52-week high that's north of where they're trading now, and I don't think people know completely how to process that. You know, the Fed has thrown a party for the past couple of decades that, you know, people have their, you know, no one here is used to inflation in a business cycle, I think. So it'll be an interesting year, I think. Strategics are certainly, there's no lack of money in the market. Strategics want to buy growth and, you know, big TAMs and accretive WAMGRs and stuff like that. None of that has changed. But I do think, you know, reconciling valuations will be a big part of the market for the next 12 months.
Yeah, I think I've seen on the venture side that the capital raising has definitely been a little bit slower. You know, so I think you'll see some of these companies that are attractive, you know, that are earlier stage, to late stage really will be, again, coming back to look at, you know, whereas prior they were looking to IPOs or very, you know, expensive late stage rounds, now they'll be putting themselves up for sale a little bit more at more reasonable valuations. And that's probably in the last, you know, like 2 months, you can see that change of, okay, we thought we were going to raise 100, now we're going to raise 80, because we just want to get it done.
Yeah. What about challenges? Do you guys want to talk about, we were talking about maybe challenges that you're facing, diligence, integration, just there's an arms race going on for early stage technology.
Yeah, I could touch on that one. You know, I think from a Becton Dickinson perspective, you know, I'm really pushing our business development leaders, right, which are hunters and gatherers, who are out, you know, surveying the market landscape, to start thinking, call it 3, 5, 7 years out, and looking at ways of engaging with targets in a meaty way earlier, right? So be it a venture investment, be it a structured acquisition, right, where we say, listen, we will fully fund the operations of your business over the next 2 to 3 years, but in exchange for that, you know, we have the exclusive right to acquire you, as means of getting at that, to your point, you know, the arms race for earlier stage technologies sooner. So we're growing that muscle, I'd say, right now at BD, but if, you know, effectively deployed, I think it's a really good way of kind of locking up, you know, assets 5, 6, 7 years down the road and you know, fixing, if you will, the risk return profile, right, and aligning them between the two organizations.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting points about it was interesting characterization because in some ways an arms race, right? That was we said, and it's kind of how early do you engage with strategics? It's a question we get very frequently, and I think generally we say engage whenever you feel ready to have a conversation with us. There's no perfect time to do it, and I think most of us out here have teams that totally geek out on the science and love to dive deep and tell us when, you know, we want to form a relationship early. I think the question then becomes, because Erich alluded to some of the structured deals, and do you go and raise money? Do you look for a long-term partner with an option? Those are trickier conversations, and I think there's no easy answer on that, but it was striking me earlier, and we were talking about this, that it's a little bit, like I'm a big basketball fan. It reminds me when people used to get drafted straight from high school into the pros, and you say, and remember Kevin Garnett did this in the 90s, and everyone said, well, how much conviction do you have to pick someone?
Yeah.
Right, and at what stage? And so it's a thing where it used to be there was a certain amount of clinical evidence you felt comfortable that someone had to be able to see. And now it feels like sometimes strategics are getting comfortable earlier and earlier in the clinical journey of companies. And I think that, you know, probably stretching that metaphor a little bit too far, I think all of us have sort of realized you have to it depends a little bit on the technology, a little bit on the space, and a little bit in the company too. Those of us who kind of get deep in areas tend to move a little faster, but I think we just have to be cautious about some of those things. There are pros and cons to moving that early and partnering with one
I agree
party.
with that.
Yeah, I mean, one of my challenges, it would appear, is I've got to backfill Erich.
You do.
Wasn't really expecting.
Big challenge.
You know, the early, how early do you go is kind of like, you know, it's fun to talk about. I participated in what did I call it? The summer of mitral love,
Yeah.
right? So we all had to figure out like which mitral replacement company we were going to go buy because there was kind of a run on the bank, and everybody went really early, and everyone's since spent hundreds of millions of dollars to bring the technology through, and that's a unique circumstance, I think, in the industry. It's certainly happened with TAVR, and now it's happened with mitral, but it's uncommon. The more common thing is venture investing and structured deals at a later stage after you've got some conviction about where the technology's at, and you've got some early studies that are hopefully predictive of the larger studies that follow. So I don't know. I don't see a lot of things that suggest to me that strategics will become more aggressive going earlier to kind of load up their P&Ls with the development expenses when there's a market out here that's fully financed. There's no lack of money to bring products to market at a risk-reward paradigm that makes sense for strategics. I don't think that's part of the new dynamic in the market, at least so far.
Yeah, I agree. If anything, the other way, maybe. I mean, it's not really advantageous for anybody to go to get super aggressive on the early stage, because you slow the companies down. We take companies and bring them in, we slow them down quite a bit. So definitely advantageous to work with them earlier, keep them independent to the best you can, keep the communication alive, and then maybe buy them later. Of course, you're at risk for losing it, but these guys aren't too hard to beat. So I mean, they're.
What about deal structures? Anything new, interesting, different, trends? Anything that you want to share?
Who wants to go?
You've gone first every time.
I know. I got to stop. I got to share the love. Somebody else go.
You're all trained in the same place, so.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're trying to fund more stuff early off our books, right? We've got a relationship with Fogarty where we contribute IP for deals that are under the line for funding and get them outside the company, and form a cap table, be a minority, have some early stage call rights that we either will or won't exercise, and we get to bring technology to market that might otherwise kind of get stuck up on the shelf in a while. And we've also done some things. Actually, Erich and I worked on this when he was running corp dev for diabetes. To bring third-party funding, R&D dollars in from, in this case, Blackstone, which had done a lot of that before when they were called Claris in the pharma industry for a decade. So, a big part of what we do outside of ordinary course, venture, structured deal, M&A, is mostly focused on increasing the effective spend in R&D using the balance sheet as opposed to the income statement. Yeah. And, no offense to accountants, but we wind up, becoming way too nerdy with respect to, accounting rules and regs because there's a lot of that involved. But, it's worth it. We've got $900 million of funding lined up against these things that are not going through our P&L, which we think ought to have a good effect long term.
Yeah, and it's having ripple effects, I think, in the market. I mean, we're seeing, we did that Blackstone deal, which is a pure R&D offset relationship with them where they committed substantial capital to fund multiple organic in-house programs. And PE guys are all, and gals are all getting wind of these types of structures. And so I don't know, Chris, if you're getting your door knocked down by names that you didn't think would traditionally do this, but there's a lot of PE firms now that are looking to partner with strategics, and it can go beyond just R&D offset, right? You can acquire a dilutive technology, bring in a PE partner to go do one of those types of transactions. You can club up, right? So if it's an expensive asset, you can do a joint venture. You can figure out ways to keep the consolidation and the earnings dilution off of your books. So there's a lot of really, really creative opportunities out there. And Noam said it well. There's a lot of cash sitting around looking to put to work into opportunities like this. So.
Club up? Is that a thing?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
It is a thing. Yeah.
It's a golf term, I think.
See what I was dealing with?
Yeah.
It's a lot of business speak, a lot of business
Yeah.
jargon.
Sorry. Yeah. It means partner. We co-invest. Yeah.
I think
There's faces in this room I noticed who have helped us get those types of transactions done. So.
I was going to say creative deal structures equals P&L optimization in a lot of ways. And I spend so much time looking at different structures, and I've never found one that's replicable, to be able to do a ton of early stage funding where you still get to really own the asset, but not really own it. I mean, it's just complicated. I think they've had more success than we have, probably.
Well, what about, what do you think are the biggest changes that you've seen, like pre to post COVID? Post-COVID, let's just assume we're at post-COVID right now, but pre to post, just in the deals that you're doing and the cadence?
Yeah, maybe I'll comment on that one. I think I agree with the other panelists. I feel like we're still very, very busy, so I haven't seen a reduction in the deal flow at all. So it has been interesting. There was a brief pause, I remember, when COVID hit in 20, and then all of us were trying to figure out how we were going to work in the new environment. And I felt like we learned pretty quickly that you could still do due diligence remotely. That wasn't as hard of a challenge as I maybe thought it was going to be. We figured that out. But what I did notice was, again, and I don't know what causes it exactly, I have theories, the deal timeline seemed to stretch. And I had talked to enough people that said they had experienced something similar. I don't think I'm making this up. It seemed like it was happening. I don't have a great answer. I do think in a lot of deals, they hit this point where you've negotiated, and eventually you got to get in the same room to hammer things out. It's that point we always reach where we're at stalemates with lawyers, and everyone's got to get together, and suddenly the whole dynamic changes, and everyone's willing to compromise. We all know that spot. We couldn't do that physically. That was one of the things I think made a difference. So it's been nice now that we can get back together again and remove log jams. But that's just one thing I've noticed. But in terms of like deal flow, still very busy.
Yeah.
Integration more challenging, I think. But getting through diligence, it didn't slow down for us.
Yeah, same sort of musings. We at BD, we did 16 deals since FY20, right? Deployed 1.3 billion in capital against M&A. So that's roughly a deal a month. So extremely busy. Pipeline's very active. So not to echo Finn's point, not a massive disruption from our side.
I was shocked we could buy companies outside the U.S. during COVID when you couldn't fly anybody in there, and you got to figure out how to create subject matter experts on the ground from. We did that with Medicrea, where we're kind of like, how many people in the whole company understand, that technology, 7, and none of them can go to France, and you got to figure out, what the operations look like. But, people did figure it out, and, that was really interesting. The integrations, it's a really good point. It's hard. We had broad-based integrations where nobody met each other in person for 18 months, and that's weird.
Or been to a plant for a plant
Yeah.
tour.
Well, or you outsourced it, right?
Yeah,
to
outsourced
people that couldn't get on planes. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. Dealing with lawyers who bill by the hour from their bedroom in their pajamas is not good.
Did you?
There was a lot less compromising going on.
Did you ever do a complete virtual deal or complete virtual diligence where you didn't really ever meet face to face? Or did you always then outsource it so that someone was physically always going to meet at some point?
You can't replace bodies on the quality manufacturing portions of the operation. So you had to show up for that. But I think other portions, management meetings where you're, meeting face to face and putting an eye on each other and all that kind of stuff, that went by the wayside, and that really was Zoom meetings. And everyone was uncomfortable with it, but it helped that there was no alternative to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're global firms, right? So we put locals, in person where we could as well.
Okay, so we said we were going to talk about deal horror stories.
We all colluded,
you guys
we're actually
came
not
up
going
with
to.
This one's a hard one.
Yeah,
Why
some
did we
people
agree
may
to
be
this?
in this room. Yeah.
Mine were all perfect, so I don't know how.
Yeah.
I got a really good one, but it's not medtech. It was when I was at GE.
There we go.
I bought Deutsche Financial Services on Halloween night in, I forget what year, had to be like 04, 05. And my Treasury Department got the wires wrong. Instead of putting money into Bankers Trust, they took money out. So it was a $7 billion deal. I was $4 billion short. And I'm kind of looking at the guy, and I'm like, well, you're a bank, right? Why can't I just borrow the money from you? And they lent me the money to buy their own company from their own bank at the Fed overnight rate.
I think that's a backhanded compliment to yourself. I mean, kudos.
They always are. I've worked for him for a long time.
Resourceful.
I mean, how did you pull that one off?
They were a bank. I mean, literally, they exist to lend money, for God's sakes.
Okay.
I think all deals have some level of horror in them.
Yeah.
So we look at our deals quarterly for 7 years after we do them. So I mean, all the warts come out.
Well, what about, okay, so what do strategics really want? I mean, what does BD, Edwards, J&J, Medtronic, what do you really want? What are you looking for?
Well, right now, a beer. That'd be
Beer is coming.
St. Patrick's Day. That'd be kind of high on the list. No, I'm kidding. You know, so kind of. So anyways, Becton Dickinson, we really have three pillars that are very nicely sort of drive our strategic roadmap, focusing on smart connected care, right? So AI, robotics, informatics, et cetera. It's sort of bucket one. So if anybody has, you know, assets, technologies that sort of fit that silo, that's attractive to us. The second bucket is alternative settings, right? So bringing, you know, technology into the home, into lower acuity settings. And then three is just improving outcomes for patients with chronic diseases. So we kind of look at our business as a transformative solutions segment of our business. We have the traditional Becton Dickinson that people know and love, the syringes and all that. But on the transformative solution side, I'd say that those are the three pillars that we're looking for primarily.
Maybe we'll just run down the row. So at Edwards, I don't know if this is a pro or con, but we're very focused, right? And we think of that as a pro for us, I guess. So you know, we have a focus on cardiovascular, so primarily structural heart disease. We also help monitor critically ill patients. So we have a hemodynamic monitoring business, surgical monitoring business, and so we're interested in applications that fit or build out from that core. The nice thing is we get to go very, very deep in those areas. The challenge is some of the times we'll have conversation with people that want us to move to a totally new adjacency, and I have to give the speech that, you know, we really are pretty disciplined about where we stay and where we play. The good thing is we love to have conversations about those areas. So we've got a whole team of people, many of them are here at the conference this week, who are just trying to scour the conference, scour the globe to find the next technologies in those places. Chris referred to the summer of mitral love. We look a lot into those areas, tricuspid mitral valve disease, heart failure, those areas. So come talk to us. We'd love to have a conversation at any point of your development cycle. And we have, you know, we have pretty good networks in those areas, and we'll do corporate VC work. So we'll take minority positions out of our group. We'll do build to buy deals like Erich talked about. That given the stage of a lot of these companies, that's something we have a natural affinity for. So we do a lot of those. But we'll do traditional M&A as well, or even partnerships and licensing deals. So we do a broad array of things, but just in a very focused area. So definitely seek us out and come find us and talk.
Look, we're all large cap, device companies, so our PE multiple is driven by revenue growth. When you say what drives your PE multiple expansion, the revenue growth is correlated, R squared 92. If you do it on cash flow or stuff like that, it's down in the 50s. So, that's what shareholders want. They want to see revenue growth. When we look at new companies, we're looking for large markets. So we care about the TAM, what the WAMGR is, what revenue CAGR we can derive from the combination of those two things. It's got to be, so ideally we're looking at companies that are addressing a large market, solve a big unmet need, and are early, not late to the technology cycle for innovation. And, everyone here is prepared to look at companies in the early stage and project all of those kind of, derivatives forward, 5, 10 years, because we all kind of get that it's a decade to develop a product. But those are the constituent parts that make it increasingly attractive. If it's a big market with high projected growth, which is, you go back to 2016 for mitral valves, that's what everyone looked at TAVR, they said mitral's going to be bigger, it's the next piggyback curve on top of a really attractive curve anyway. And, we'll value those, and, depending on where it is for our strategic fit, we'll put a lot of money into it after we buy it. Or, we'll pay a lot of money after you burn down all the risk. So that's what kind of, we've got 200 people between ventures, BD, and corporate development out looking in the market for opportunities like that fit our strategic framework, and that's kind of how we think about life.
Yeah.
Ditto. It's basically, a reality of large company M&A is that, you want the large market, you want to be able to roll it in easily. And that's the only thing I would add is that, we want to be able to really get as much of a finished company as we can, really, at the end of the day, something that's, maybe even commercialized with reimbursement. If you can check off all of those things that make it easy for us to roll it in and plug it into the P&L and plug it into a international sales and marketing R&D team, then it's easier and better for us, and we can afford to pay more, and you can realize the benefit of making more money that way.
What are some of, we have a lot of startups that are dialing in, that are streaming in, and a lot of startups in the audience. What advice do you have for them as they go to approach you?
Look, my number one thing is I think you've got to be ambitious with your clinical trial design, right? You're looking to validate a product that you want to get reimbursement for, and making it equivalent to existing forms of treatment isn't automatically going to do that. And it takes longer, it costs more money, and you got to raise more money, and there's a lot of, and it's riskier, but the payback is better for it. So our number one thing where we're looking at early stage companies is that's what we're looking for, whether the trial design is up to the genuine market opportunity for the unmet need. And it's the biggest area of mismatch that we see.
Yeah, definitely a huge area of mismatch. I mean, to the extent that you can be open-minded and listen, when a clinical regulatory team gives you an opinion from us, that's one area I think where we're all particularly strong, and the startups are particularly weak. And the ones that listen, I think really they get a lot of value for listening and implementing the changes. So on the venture side, I see that pretty much all day long. They want to do smaller studies, not enough control, all those types of issues. But to the extent that they listen and actually fix it, they get paid back in the end.
Yeah, I would just add to that a couple things. One is, approach us early, right? You don't have to be completely baked, but start to get the dialogue going so that, you're on our radar, you're showing up in our portfolio reviews. I think, make it hard for us to say no. Right, if you do some of the heavier lifting up front and thinking through sort of where does your technology fit, all of our strategy stuff is all public, right? It's a lot of it is JP Morgan, website. We have analyst days and all that. Go do that research. I think it'd make it hard for us to say no. To Chris's point, big TAMs, accretive to our growth rates, non-dilutive as much as possible. All of that, kind of doing some of that earlier thinking, and making it hard for us to say no would be some of my advice.
Yeah, I just echo the same points, but Chris, when you said that at first, that was surprising, but then I thought about it and I said, actually, that is kind of the greatest mismatch I see. I think all of us know, be crisp on your TAM. How do you have a pathway to leadership? That's something we all look for too. I think a lot of us say, we're not interested necessarily in being third or fourth to market with a technology. We want a path to leadership. That's being said, we don't mind competing in markets like we do today, where there's a huge patient need and we feel like there's place for us to compete. In fact, we're benefiting patients by the solutions we both have in structural heart. Sorry, you gonna say?
No, I agree. Look, you got to be able to get paid, so the clinical data is the path to reimbursement.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of companies that did everything right, but their trial just didn't, kick in. And your timeline gets kind of punted down the road a lot when, you've got to do a bunch of, post-market studies to kind of round out, how you can go from filing one claim at a time. And those are, it's not just value, it's time. So, you wind up paying less and you wind up, your revenue curve gets kicked out for any kind of inflection point where it grows fast by a couple of years while you're running, the RCTs or stuff like that after the fact.
Yeah.
So that's, ambitious trial design is riskier, but it's a shortcut to the inflection point that, the value lies in.
Do you guys ever see where a startup's coming to you and you're like, wrong indication, the TAM's not right, there's issues, but you're interested in the technology, and you're like, if you go back and you fix all of these things, then come back to me later. Does that happen often, where they actually tick the box, they do everything, come back, and then you're interested?
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, I can think of, I bumped into somebody here who I ran into maybe 3 years ago at a different conference, and we, sat down and discussed how to, and he was basically had a great technology, but he was going after the wrong indication. He changed the indication, and now he's raised a ton of money and doing really well. That's another area where it's just worth listening to what we have to say, because we're hunting for certain areas, and a lot of times entrepreneurs are coming at from a tech perspective rather than from a market perspective. And a small change, to, if you're going to put in all that energy and all that money, go after the big market.
Yeah. So what's the biggest mistake or that you see a lot of these entrepreneurs or watch outs that you're seeing?
Yeah, maybe I'll just make a couple comments. Same point before, there's as we're saying this and talking here, I'm realizing there's a tension that exists between speed to market and sort of building a business that's going to capture the value, like Chris said. I mean, I think we end up having a lot of conversations about the regulatory and clinical strategies companies are taking very early on, which is somewhat surprising, because I think in a lot of cases, like I said, there's a ton of capital that's out there. You could adopt one of those. Hopefully, you're thinking about ambitious strategies, but I think a lot of companies just want to get want to get to the commercial event, the first sale, whatever it is. And so we spend a lot of time on that. The other thing I would say is think a lot about the strategy you have around manufacturing, quality, things like that. I mean, I think what's interesting is on a lot of these build-to-buy structures, they do feel more like a partnership in the interim period, and companies can benefit from the expertise that all of us have. And I think a lot of times, use that, and also think about actually being able to make the product, scale the product, design for manufacturing. All those things are things that probably could use to think a little earlier about in the process.
Yeah, that's great. You saw where I was going. I mean, so just for folks streaming in and here in the room, these build the buys that we're talking about, they typically come with a meaningful tranched, milestone-driven investment coming from the strategic. Usually there's a joint steering committee, or there's ways in which that we can interact. And then there's usually acquisition triggers, right? And to Finn's point, cost of goods can be one of those triggers, right? So they're thinking early and often around how do I, once, BD acquires these guys, I'm stepping right into a gross profit accretive technology day one. I'm not having to do a bunch of rework. I'm not having to spend a bunch of time remediating quality systems, on and on. And so there is a lot of value in that. The flip to that is if the technology doesn't work or you don't hit the milestones, you're having a bit of a different conversation. So, a lot of it is kind of putting, that type of a structure into a very, very confident management team's hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, knowing what I know now, if I were a startup CEO, there's a lot of free advice you can get from the strategics. And, you know, you can get it penalty-free. You don't have to be in a build-to-buy to get it. You know, we can help with trial design. We can help with regulatory, you know, discussions about, you know, reimbursement, and engage actively in pattern recognition about what's worked and what hasn't with, you know, reasonable comparative companies and stuff like that. And, you know, we're not rooting against a company to succeed. You know, generally, a strategic is rooting for a company to burn down risk to the point where an acquisition makes sense. And, you know, the quicker that we can help the company to get there is better for us. So, you know, the biggest thing I tell people is don't be shy. We'll give this stuff away in terms of our, like, functional expertise around these areas.
Yep, well said.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a communication thing. The way I see it is that to the extent that you communicate as much with the strategics you're partnered with, that's where I see the success comes from, you know, that I've seen in the last couple of years on the venture side, that the companies that engage with us where there's a ton of communication back and forth, and they do take advantage of this stuff that Chris is talking about, really pays off. They get a positive, you know, reward, but it really is a personal connection between the R&D team and the company, or, you know, whoever is kind of leading that relationship, I think is really critical.
Well, I think that was about all the questions I had. Do you want to say anything else? Any other comments?
Well, why'd you leave? I mean,
This is awkward. I was trying to explain it to you over the phone, but you never called me back. It's not you, though. It's me.
done a pretty good shtick.
Was it the compensation? What was that?
Well, look, we know we are the only thing between you and green beer. So I just want to, let's give a warm round of applause for our amazing panelists. And thank you, LSI. Thank you, Scott Pentel. It's been a great meeting. Thanks.
That was fun. Thank you,
Thank
ladies.
you. Thanks very much.